The mysterious disappearances Neo Haven, a dazzling metropolis of towering skyscrapers, neon lights, and restless souls caught in the whirlwind of an unceasing city life. But behind its shimmering facade, a darker mystery lurked, waiting in the shadows. Ethan Drake, a seasoned detective with the Neo Haven Police Department, leaned against his car, eyes locked on the dimly lit alley ahead. A half-empty cup of coffee rested in his grip, now cold from neglect. He watched the busy streets, but his mind was elsewhere. 7 disappearances in 3 weeks. No signs of struggle, no physical evidence. Surveillance cameras captured nothing. No suspicious figures, no strange activity. It was as if the victims had simply ceased to exist. The only witness was a homeless man, his body shaking with fear. "I saw a shadow move, and then they were gone." Ethan wasn't one to believe in ghost stories. He had seen the worst of humanity, faced Neo Haven's most ruthless criminals. But this was different. Mark Connors, his longtime partner, approached with a stack of case files in hand, his face worn with exhaustion. "Ethan, I combed through old missing person reports. You're not going to like what I found." Ethan didn't turn, only exhaled through his nose. "We're not the first ones to deal with this, are we?" Mark tossed the files onto the hood of the car, flipping through the yellowed pages. 8 years ago, 5 people vanished overnight. 6 years ago, 12 more. None of them were ever found. And worse, no one even remembers them. Ethan's brow furrowed. "You're saying there's a pattern?" Mark hesitated before continuing. "There's something else, Ethan. The families of the missing people. They don't remember them." Ethan turned sharply. "What?" "I interviewed a woman whose son disappeared last week. She reported it, called us nonstop. But today, she doesn't even recall having a son. It's like he never existed." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. He had seen cover-ups before. He had seen people paid off to keep quiet. But this was something else entirely. Mark nodded grimly. "And it's escalating. If this keeps up, at some point, the entire city could be swallowed by whatever is taking these people." Ethan pressed his palms against the car, thinking. No evidence, no reliable witnesses. But one thing was certain. If no one stopped it, the disappearances wouldn't end. Tonight, he would walk straight into the heart of the mystery. Near midnight, the outer district of the city was almost entirely silent. Neon lights flickered in the distance, but in the narrow alley where Ethan now stood, the darkness swallowed everything. A creeping unease settled in his chest. Ethan moved carefully, fingers grazing the handle of his gun, his body tense and alert. He wasn't the type to be spooked by shadows, but tonight, the air felt different. A gust of cold wind brushed against his neck, carrying the rustling sound of debris shifting on the pavement. Then he heard footsteps, light, almost imperceptible, but they were there. Holding his breath, Ethan stepped further into the alley, where the glow of the streetlights barely reached. "Is someone there?" His voice was firm, steady, no response. Then, movement, right behind him. Ethan spun, gun drawn, but there was nothing. He remained still, scanning every corner, every flickering shadow. There was a sensation, like something unseen brushing against the air beside him. Then right in front of him, the air rippled, like a transparent veil shifting, an unnatural distortion in the space itself. Ethan's heartbeat slammed against his ribs. And then, she appeared. She emerged as if stepping through a doorway from another dimension. Her skin glowed faintly under the dim city lights. Her hair, long and weightless, moved as though it was untouched by gravity. But it was her eyes, a piercing silver hue that shimmered with something not of this world, that truly confirmed it. And behind her, a long, slender tail, pulsing with soft luminescence, drifted gently in the air. She didn't flinch. She didn't run. She simply stared at Ethan with an unreadable expression. Ethan didn't move. Every instinct in his body screamed that this wasn't human. Then she spoke. "You can see me?" Ethan hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "Should I not be able to?" Selene studied him carefully, silver eyes reflecting the dim light. "No human ever has." Silence stretched between them. Ethan wasn't sure why, but he felt something shift in that moment, like an invisible thread had just connected them. The world seemed to slow in that moment. Ethan wanted to say something, anything, but his mind raced for an answer that didn't exist. A part of him screamed that this could not be real, but another part whispered, "This is just the beginning." Selene's secret. Ethan kept his grip firm on his gun, but his instincts told him that the woman standing before him wasn't a threat. She remained still, unafraid, unmoving, her silver eyes glowing softly in the darkness, like two lonely stars lost in the endless void of the night. There was something different about her, not because she had appeared out of nowhere, or because of the faintly glowing tail drifting behind her, but because of the way she looked at him. No hostility, no fear, just a single simple question that weighed heavier than anything he had ever heard. "You can see me?" Ethan swallowed hard. He had never heard anyone ask a question like that before. "Aren't you standing right in front of me?" She tilted her head slightly, narrowing her gaze as if trying to make sense of the impossible. "You weren't supposed to see me." Ethan didn't move. The more he listened, the more intrigued he became. But there was also a growing sense of danger creeping up his spine. "Who are you?" She was silent for a moment before answering. "My name is Selene." Ethan repeated the name in his mind. It wasn't in any database, no missing person report, no known record. He tried a different approach. "Selene, I'm investigating the recent disappearances. Do you know anything about them?" Selene glanced away, looking toward the end of the dark alley. "They didn't disappear." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" She hesitated before exhaling softly. "You've seen enough. And if you can see me, that means you're already a target." Her words carried the weight of a warning. Ethan didn't like the sound of that. His instincts screamed that Selene knew more than she was saying. "A target for who?" Selene turned back to him, something painful flickering in her silver eyes. "They're coming." Ethan opened his mouth to ask another question, but boom! A violent explosion of red light tore through the alley wall. Debris scattered. The air thickened with dust and smoke. Ethan barely had time to react before Selene grabbed his arm. "Don't move!" The dust swirled, and through the thick air, figures in black, tactical suits emerged. Their movements were inhumanly precise, synchronized like machines. One of them turned his head sharply, sniffing the air like a predator. Ethan's grip on his gun tightened. "They can track me," Selene whispered. Ethan frowned. "How?" Before she could answer, one of the agents suddenly turned directly toward them, without seeing them. Ethan's stomach twisted, not by sight, not by sound, but by something else entirely. Ethan whirled around, gun raised. Shadows moved in the darkness. Footsteps echoed, multiple figures closing in from different directions. Then a voice rang out through a cold, metallic speaker, devoid of any emotion. "Selene, there's nowhere left to run." Ethan didn't know who these people were, but he knew one thing for sure. They weren't the police. Selene didn't hesitate. She tapped a device on her wrist, and her entire body shimmered, vanishing into thin air. Ethan's mind screamed that this was far beyond any case he had ever handled, but his instincts took over. A bolt of red energy shot toward him. He rolled to the side, narrowly dodging the blast. Whoever these people were, they weren't here to talk. Ethan hit the ground hard, scrambling behind a large dumpster as more red beams burned through the air. His pulse hammered in his ears. He whispered under his breath, "Selene?" No response. She was gone. But that didn't mean she had abandoned him. One of the masked men advanced, his gun pulsing with red energy. "Where is he?" another voice asked. "Search the area. If you find him, kill him. The orders were clear. Selene is the only one we need." Ethan clenched his teeth. He hated being underestimated. The masked figure stepped closer to his hiding spot. His weapon hummed, ready to fire. Just as he was about to pull the trigger, boom! The attacker was flung backward as if struck by an invisible force. Ethan's eyes widened. Selene was still here. She had just revealed herself in the most unexpected way. The remaining agents panicked, scanning their surroundings in confusion. She's using her abilities. Activate the gravity net. One of them deployed a spherical device, sending out a pulse of electromagnetic waves that disrupted the air around them. Selene's invisibility shattered. She reappeared, looking exhausted. Ethan didn't think. He moved. In a swift motion, he aimed and shot at the device. Boom! The gravity net exploded, its light fizzling out. Selene gasped as her body regained its freedom, her silver eyes flickering. Without hesitation, she grabbed Ethan's wrist and pulled him into a sprint. Ethan didn't resist, because now he understood. She wasn't the enemy. The people hunting her were the real monsters. The two of them raced through the winding alleys of Neo Haven, the sounds of pursuit never far behind. Selene struggled to maintain speed. Ethan noticed her growing weaker. They couldn't run forever. His eyes darted around, searching for an escape route. Then, he saw it. An old subway entrance leading into the city's abandoned underground tunnels. This way, he shouted, pulling Selene toward it. They rushed down the staircase, swallowed by the darkness below. Behind them, the pursuers came to a halt, hesitating at the entrance. The commanding officer growled, "Lock down every exit. She won't get away this time." Deep in the tunnels, Ethan and Selene stopped to catch their breath. The underground was silent, save for the distant hum of the city above. Ethan turned to her, his voice firm. "You need to tell me the truth. Right now." Selene's silver eyes flickered in the dim light. She hesitated before finally speaking. "I'm not the only one like me, and if they catch me, they won't stop." Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. Then slowly, he nodded. But deep down, a voice whispered, "You don't even know her. You don't know what you're getting into." Ethan had spent years chasing criminals, solving mysteries. But this wasn't normal. He could still walk away, pretend he never saw her, let someone else deal with the impossible. But then he looked into Selene's silver eyes, and in them, he didn't see a monster. He saw fear, desperation, a silent plea. Ethan exhaled sharply. Damn it all. "Then we won't let them catch you." "Then we won't let them catch you." Selene's breath hitched slightly. She hadn't expected him to choose her side, but he already had. He didn't fully understand what was happening yet, but he knew one thing. Selene needed protection, and he wasn't going to let her fight alone. Selene's confession. The abandoned subway tunnel was suffocating in its darkness. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and rusting metal, the silence only broken by the distant hum of the city above. Ethan had no idea what he had just gotten himself into, but one thing was certain. Selene was in danger, and now so was he. There was no turning back. Ethan leaned against the cold concrete wall, forcing himself to steady his breath after the relentless chase. Selene knelt beside him, her silver eyes flickering toward the tunnel entrance, where their pursuers could appear at any moment. A faint glow emanated from her skin, barely noticeable in the dim light. Ethan spoke first, his voice low, edged with skepticism. "Now tell me, who the hell are you?" Selene hesitated, as if weighing whether she should tell him the truth. For the first time, her expression wasn't distant or unreadable. It held uncertainty, maybe even sadness. Then finally she met his gaze. "I don't belong to this world." Ethan exhaled a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "Yeah, I figured that much when you disappeared in front of me." Selene tilted her head slightly as if analyzing him. "You're not afraid of me?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm a cop. I'm afraid of criminals, of things I can't control. But you? Number, I just want to know what the hell is going on." Selene looked down, pressing her fingers lightly against the dirt-covered ground, her hands trembling just slightly. "I come from a place far from here, a world where beings like me exist. We can move through space, between dimensions, places humans can't perceive." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "You're saying you can move between worlds?" She nodded. "We were never invaders, never monsters. We simply existed alongside your world. But when humans discovered us, everything changed." There was pain in her voice. Ethan could hear it. "I'm not the first person to see you, am I?" Selene gave a small bitter smile. "Number, Others have seen me before, and most of them disappeared. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. The missing people, they're connected to you. Selene shook her head. I didn't take them, but the ones hunting me, they did. Ethan's jaw tightened. Who? Selene slowly lifted her head. In the dark tunnel, her silver eyes gleamed. Nova. The name hit him like a brick. Ethan had heard whispers of Nova before, a shadowy organization operating outside the jurisdiction of any government. No one really knew what they did, or who they answered to. But this was beyond any theory he'd ever considered. Nova is after you? Selene nodded. They're not just after me. They're hunting everything they can't control or comprehend. Ethan stared at her, and for the first time, he saw her not as an alien, not as a mystery, but as a fugitive, a survivor, a victim. Slowly, he reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder. It wasn't quite reassurance, but it wasn't cold either. Can they find us here? Selene's gaze flickered toward the tunnel entrance. Her voice was calm but laced with certainty. They won't stop until they have me. Ethan nodded. Then we won't let them. Selene's breath hitched slightly. She hadn't expected him to take her side, but he already had. He didn't understand everything yet, but he knew one thing. Selene needed protection, and he wasn't about to let her fight alone. But far away in the heart of Neo Haven, Nova was already preparing its next move. Deep beneath the city, within an underground facility hidden from the world, a row of suspended stasis chambers pulsed with an eerie blue glow. Inside them, other beings like Selene. A scientist in a black Nova uniform adjusted the readings on a holographic screen. His expression was unreadable as he muttered into his comms. The prototype escaped, but we still have the others. On the other end of the call, a familiar voice answered, cold, calculating, the Nova commander. Good, begin phase 2. In the underground chamber, a massive gateway hummed, its edges flickering with unstable energy. Scientists in Nova uniforms adjusted controls, their faces grim. A high-ranking officer turned to the commander. Sir, without the key, the portal is unstable. We've already lost 2 teams to failed attempts. The commander's smirk didn't fade. Then we retrieve the key, no matter the cost. Outside in the darkness, something moved. Nova hadn't given up, and Ethan and Selene were running out of time. The perilous chase. The abandoned subway tunnel was suffocating in its silence. The air was thick with the scent of damp concrete and rusting metal. Every breath Ethan took, laced with the weight of uncertainty. Somewhere beyond the darkness, they were coming. Selene pressed herself against the wall, her body trembling ever so slightly. The silver glow in her eyes was fading. She was exhausted. Ethan's concern deepened. Are you okay? Selene inhaled deeply before giving a slight nod. I just need time to recover. Ethan clenched his jaw. They didn't have time. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the tunnel entrance. Steady, unrelenting. Then the sweep of searchlights cut through the darkness. A voice followed, a deep, authoritative tone dripping with control. Selene, stop running. You know what will happen if you continue to resist. Selene held her breath. Ethan didn't need to see her face to know she was afraid, but he wasn't. Ethan exhaled, speaking low enough for only her to hear. I don't know how long you've been running, but if we don't want to be caught, you need to trust me. Selene met his gaze. There was hesitation in her silver eyes, but also a flicker of hope. Ethan turned back to the shadows ahead. The footsteps of Nova's operatives were drawing closer. He clenched his fists. There was no other choice. Let's go. Selene vanished into thin air. Ethan didn't hesitate. He ran. Behind him, gunfire erupted like a thunderstorm. Ethan couldn't see Selene, but he felt her moving beside him. The darkness swallowed them whole, yet the relentless footsteps of their pursuers echoed loudly. Ethan sprinted past derelict train cars, the thick dust swirling as he disturbed the air. Ahead, a rusted metal door loomed, their only escape route. He reached for the handle. Locked. Damn it, a sharp voice called out behind him. There! Lock down the sector. Ethan spun around, catching glimpses of black-clad figures armed with glowing plasma rifles, their red energy casting sinister shadows against the tunnel walls. "Selene!" he called. No response. Then, a hand on his shoulder, a voice right next to his ear. "Step back." Ethan barely had time to react before the metal door shook violently, as if an unseen force was shoving it from the other side. A loud crack rang out. The lock shattered. Selene reappeared, gasping for breath. "Move!" Ethan didn't argue. They bolted through the door. The new tunnel was narrower, darker, more claustrophobic. Ethan noticed that Selene was struggling. Her body flickered, like a dying signal trying to hold on. She wasn't fully invisible anymore. He pulled her to a halt, pressing them both against a crumbling wall. "You're not okay." Selena pressed a hand to her temple, her voice hoarse. "I've never used this much power in such a short time." Ethan scanned their surroundings. Nova wasn't going to give up that easily, and he was right. A voice, low, commanding, rang out from above, echoing down the tunnel like a whisper in the dark. "Ethan Drake." Ethan's blood ran cold. He looked up. A man in a black armored suit stood on a metal walkway above them. Nova's commander. He was smiling, but there was no warmth in it. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." Ethan's muscles tensed. "Then enlighten me." The commander chuckled, his amusement almost genuine. "You think she's a victim? A frightened little fugitive?" Beside Ethan, Selene went rigid. The commander continued, his voice almost taunting. "Do you even know what she really is?" Ethan glanced at Selene. She looked worried, but she didn't deny it. That unsettled him. The commander tilted his head, as if reading Ethan's thoughts. "I see. You don't—" Then, his smirk widened. "We'll meet again soon?" He raised a hand, signaling his operatives. To Ethan's shock, they didn't pursue. Instead, they turned away, disappearing into the darkness. Ethan's stomach churned. Nova never abandoned a target. The commander knew something Ethan didn't. Turning to Selene, he fixed her with a hard stare. "He's right, isn't he?" Selene clenched her fists. She was hesitating. Finally, she met his eyes. Her voice was quiet but heavy with meaning. "I'm not just an alien." A shiver ran down Ethan's spine. There was more to her story, and now he had no choice but to find out the truth. Selene's secret. Inside an abandoned warehouse deep within Neo Haven's old industrial district, Ethan sat on a rotting wooden crate, his eyes fixed on Selene. The air between them was heavy, not just from the exhaustion of the chase, but from the unanswered question that lingered between them. Selene stood near a broken window, the dim streetlights casting fractured shadows across her pale skin. She looked almost unreal, like a painting caught between dimensions, existing in the fragile space between light and darkness. But Ethan wasn't mesmerized by her beauty. Not anymore. He wanted answers. "You said you're not just an alien." His voice was steady, firm. "Then what are you?" Selene hesitated. For the first time, she looked uncertain, as if the truth was something even she wasn't sure she should share. Then, with a slow breath, she turned to face him. Her silver eyes shimmered in the dim light, filled with resolve. "I am one of the last of my kind." Ethan's brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" Selene stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried the weight of an entire lost civilization. "My people weren't just from another planet. We had no fixed home. We moved between dimensions, between realities that exist parallel to yours. We are not bound to this universe alone." Ethan's mind reeled. "You're saying you can move between worlds?" She nodded. "That's why I can become invisible, or more accurately, why I can phase out of sync with this reality. But that's only part of it." She raised her hand, and right before Ethan's eyes, reality bent. The space around her hand twisted, rippling like a mirage in a desert. Behind her for a brief moment, the warehouse wall seemed to shift. No longer solid concrete, but a different place entirely. A city that wasn't Neo Haven, a sky that wasn't Earth's, and then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. Ethan felt a cold chill crawl down his spine. What the hell was that? Selene lowered her hand, her expression darkening. I don't just exist in this world. I can touch others. Ethan exhaled slowly. This wasn't just about aliens. Selene wasn't from another planet. She was from another reality. That's why Nova is after you. His voice was calm, but the realization was anything but. Because of your ability. Selene shook her head. They don't just want my power. She met his gaze, her silver eyes reflecting something far deeper than fear. They want to use me to open a gateway between worlds. I am the last remaining key. Ethan leaned back against the cold warehouse wall, his mind racing. Nova wasn't just hunting an alien. They were trying to break into entire new dimensions. And the missing people? His voice was grim. Selene's lips parted slightly, but she hesitated. They were experiments. Nova used them to test their technology, but they couldn't control the power. Those people were sent into different dimensions and never came back. Ethan's fingers curled into a tight fist. Son of a bitch! Nova wasn't just hunting. They were experimenting on innocent people, sending them into other realities, never knowing if they would survive or even if those dimensions would be safe for them. Ethan exhaled sharply. His pulse was pounding. We have to stop them. Selene blinked, surprised by his certainty. You'd help me? Ethan met her gaze. I don't know how much of this I can believe yet. He shook his head. But I know one thing. Nova can't be allowed to keep doing this. For the first time, Selene smiled. It was small, faint, but there, like she had been alone for too long and had forgotten what trust felt like. But the moment was short-lived. A metallic clang echoed from outside the warehouse. Ethan's instincts kicked in instantly. He was already on his feet, gun drawn. Selene turned, eyes narrowing. Footsteps, heavy boots on concrete. A voice echoed from the shadows. Did you really think you could hide forever? Ethan felt his stomach sink. Nova had found them. Nova's trap. The air inside the warehouse was thick with tension, so tight it felt like a wire ready to snap. Ethan's grip on his gun was firm, his gaze locked onto the metal doors rattling with each approaching step from the other side. Selene stood beside him, her breath just a fraction too fast. This wasn't just another fight. This was an ambush. Outside, the rhythmic stomp of military boots echoed against the concrete floor. Then came the voice. Low, confident, unshaken. Ethan Drake, you surprise me. Nova's commander. Ethan didn't need to see him to know. This wasn't a man who left loose ends. The doors creaked open, and beams of red light from Nova's plasma rifles sliced through the dim warehouse. A squad of black-clad agents stepped inside, their movements precise, silent hunters closing in. And then, he entered. The commander of Nova, moving at a deliberate pace, his cold gaze sweeping the room as if he had already won. He folded his arms, smirking. I expected better from you, Drake. Ethan didn't lower his gun. Then you don't know me very well. The commander gave a humorless chuckle. Don't flatter yourself. I don't care about you. I only want her. His predatory gaze shifted to Selene. For a second, Ethan saw something hungry in the way he looked at her. Do you have any idea what you're worth, Selene? His tone was mocking. You're not just some alien fugitive. You're a gateway, the key to something humanity has never touched. Selene remained silent, but Ethan could feel the tension in her shoulders. The commander continued. We've spent too long hunting you down. You didn't actually think you could run forever, did you? Selene wasn't scared. Ethan saw it instantly. She wasn't afraid of being captured. She was afraid of what would happen if she was. Ethan clenched his jaw, looking at her. We're not letting them take you. Selene met his eyes. And then, as if making her final decision, she whispered, Step back. No one had time to react. The air around Selene twisted. A sudden whirlwind of energy rippled outward, distorting space itself. One of the Nova agents shouted, She's opening a rift! Shut her down now! Too late. A pulse of pure force exploded from Selene, sending shock waves through the warehouse. Ethan felt gravity itself bend around them, as if space was being torn apart. The Nova agents staggered, their bodies glitching, frozen mid-step as if caught between two realities. The commander's voice cut through the chaos. "Contain her! Now!" A Nova operative activated a suppression device, releasing a blinding pulse of energy. Selene gasped, stumbling. The energy field around her collapsed. The vortex snapped shut. Ethan instantly knew what had happened. Selene had burned too much power. She was drained, and Nova knew it. The commander smirked. "Impressive, but not enough." He raised a hand. Two Nova agents lunged toward Selene. Ethan didn't think. He just moved. Gunfire. Ethan's first shot dropped one of the agents. The second flinched, but before he could react, Ethan was already on him. A brutal punch slammed into the agent's jaw, knocking him out cold. The commander took a step back, eyes narrowing. "You are becoming a problem, Drake." Ethan ignored him. He grabbed Selene, voice low. "Can you still run?" Selene tightened her grip on his arm. "Yes." Ethan nodded once. "Then we go." They burst out of the warehouse, shadows swallowing them whole. Gunfire roared behind them, streaks of red plasma cutting through the night. They didn't stop running. Through alleyways, over crumbling fences, darting through the maze of industrial ruins. Ethan couldn't see Selene anymore. She was vanishing, slipping between space and reality, her body flickering out of sight. He couldn't, but he didn't need to. He just had to run fast enough not to die. The old bridge loomed ahead, the last stretch before they could disappear into the sprawl of Neo Haven. Selene glanced at him, her eyes full of concern. "We can't keep running." Ethan smirked, breath heavy. "We don't have to. We just have to make sure they can't find us." Selene didn't ask. She trusted him. They sprinted onto the bridge, and as Nova closed in behind them, Ethan pulled the pin on a smoke grenade. The explosion of thick gray mist enveloped the entire bridge. By the time it cleared, they were gone. Standing beneath the orange glow of a streetlight, the commander of Nova watched the empty bridge. He didn't pursue. He didn't need to. One of his agents stepped forward. "Sir, do we continue pursuit?" The commander smirked. Ethan's instincts kicked in instantly. He was already on his feet, gun drawn. Selene turned, eyes narrowing. Footsteps. Heavy boots on concrete. A voice echoed from the shadows. "Did you really think you could hide forever?" Ethan felt his stomach sink. Nova had found them. Nova's trap. The air inside the warehouse was thick with tension, so tight it felt like a wire ready to snap. Ethan's grip on his gun was firm, his gaze locked onto the metal doors rattling with each approaching step from the other side. Selene stood beside him, her breath just a fraction too fast. This wasn't just another fight. This was an ambush. Outside, the rhythmic stomp of military boots echoed against the concrete floor. Then came the voice. Low, confident, unshaken. "Ethan Drake, you surprise me. Nova's commander." Ethan didn't need to see him to know. This wasn't a man who left loose ends. The doors creaked open, and beams of red light from Nova's plasma rifles sliced through the dim warehouse. A squad of black-clad agents stepped inside, their movements precise, silent hunters closing in. And then, he entered. The commander of Nova, moving at a deliberate pace, his cold gaze sweeping the room as if he had already won. He folded his arms, smirking. "I expected better from you, Drake." Ethan didn't lower his gun. "Then you don't know me very well." The commander gave a humorless chuckle. "Don't flatter yourself. I don't care about you. I only want her." His predatory gaze shifted to Selene. For a second, Ethan saw something hungry in the way he looked at her. "Do you have any idea what you're worth, Selene?" His tone was mocking. "You're not just some alien fugitive. You're a gateway, the key to something humanity has never touched." Selene remained silent, but Ethan could feel the tension in her shoulders. The commander continued. "We've spent too long hunting you down. You didn't actually think you could run forever, did you?" Selene wasn't scared. Ethan saw it instantly. She wasn't afraid of being captured. She was afraid of what would happen if she was. Ethan clenched his jaw, looking at her. "We're not letting them take you." Selene met his eyes. And then, as if making her final decision, she whispered, "Step back." No one had time to react. The air around Selene twisted. A sudden whirlwind of energy rippled outward, distorting space itself. One of the Nova agents shouted, "She's opening a rift! Shut her down now!" Too late. A pulse of pure force exploded from Selene, sending shock waves through the warehouse. Ethan felt gravity itself bend around them, as if space was being torn apart. The Nova agents staggered, their bodies glitching, frozen mid-step as if caught between two realities. The commander's voice cut through the chaos. "Contain her! Now!" A Nova operative activated a suppression device, releasing a blinding pulse of energy. Selene gasped, stumbling. The energy field around her collapsed. The vortex snapped shut. Ethan instantly knew what had happened. Selene had burned too much power. She was drained, and Nova knew it. The commander smirked. "Impressive, but not enough." He raised a hand. Two Nova agents lunged toward Selene. Ethan didn't think. He just moved. Gunfire. Ethan's first shot dropped one of the agents. The second flinched, but before he could react, Ethan was already on him. A brutal punch slammed into the agent's jaw, knocking him out cold. The commander took a step back, eyes narrowing. "You are becoming a problem, Drake." Ethan ignored him. He grabbed Selene, voice low. "Can you still run?" Selene tightened her grip on his arm. "Yes." Ethan nodded once. "Then we go." They burst out of the warehouse, shadows swallowing them whole. Gunfire roared behind them, streaks of red plasma cutting through the night. They didn't stop running. Through alleyways, over crumbling fences, darting through the maze of industrial ruins. Ethan couldn't see Selene anymore. She was vanishing, slipping between space and reality, her body flickering out of sight. He couldn't, but he didn't need to. He just had to run fast enough not to die. The old bridge loomed ahead, the last stretch before they could disappear into the sprawl of Neo Haven. Selene glanced at him, her eyes full of concern. "We can't keep running." Ethan smirked, breath heavy. "We don't have to. We just have to make sure they can't find us." Selene didn't ask. She trusted him. They sprinted onto the bridge, and as Nova closed in behind them, Ethan pulled the pin on a smoke grenade. The explosion of thick gray mist enveloped the entire bridge. By the time it cleared, they were gone. Standing beneath the orange glow of a streetlight, the commander of Nova watched the empty bridge. He didn't pursue. He didn't need to. One of his agents stepped forward. "Sir, do we continue pursuit?" The commander smirked. "No need. They can't run forever." He turned, vanishing into the shadows. In his hand, a small glowing device blinked. A tracker, attached to Ethan. The commander exhaled, his smile widening. "Selene has chosen the hard path." His fingers tightened around the device. "And I promise she'll regret it." Sacrifice and the choice. The city was cloaked in silence, but in the shadows of Neo Haven, Ethan and Selene had no time to rest. They had escaped Nova, for now. But Ethan knew the truth. It was temporary. They couldn't keep running. For over an hour, they moved through back alleys and abandoned districts, avoiding the city's surveillance grid. Finally, they found an old condemned apartment building, a relic of a past redevelopment plan that never happened. Ethan stepped inside first, sweeping the space with his flashlight, making sure they were alone. "We can stay here for a while." Selene followed, her breath still unsteady. She was drained. Ethan shut the door, sealing them off from the outside world, but not from the danger that lurked beyond it. He turned to Selene. The faint glow on her skin was dimmer than before. "Are you okay?" Selene leaned against the wall, eyes closed, nodding slightly. "I just, need to recover. Using my energy for this long is weakening me." Ethan watched her for a long moment. Right now, she wasn't an alien. She wasn't a mystery. She was just someone who had been running for too long. He sat beside her, pulling out a small knife, turning it absently in his hands. "I don't like running without a plan." Selene opened her eyes, studying him. "What are you thinking?" Ethan gave a tired smirk, but there was a fire in his eyes. "I think it's time we stop running." Selene frowned. "What do you mean?" Ethan set the knife down on the floor, his gaze sharpening. "Nova isn't going to stop. We could run for the rest of our lives and they'd still find us. And I'm not planning to live as a fugitive." Selene was silent. He was right. So what do you want to do? Ethan inhaled, finally voicing the decision that had been forming in his mind. I want to end this. I want to fight back. Selene looked at him, startled. That's suicide. Ethan smirked. Not if we do it right. She held his gaze, as if searching for doubt, but there wasn't any. Do you really believe we can take them on? Ethan nodded. I don't know if we can destroy them completely, but if we keep running, we'll never get a chance to try. Selene clenched her fists. Nova isn't just hunting aliens. They have things even I don't understand. Their technology, it's beyond anything I've ever seen. Ethan shrugged. I don't fully understand you either, but that doesn't mean I fear you. Selene blinked. Then for the first time in a long while, she smiled. You're strange, Ethan. Ethan laughed softly, but his eyes were serious again. I need you to trust me. We can't do this if you're not ready. Selene took a slow breath. Then she placed a hand over her chest, where the faint pulse of energy still flickered beneath her skin. If we do this, I have one condition. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Name it. Selene locked eyes with him, her voice steady. If at any point this becomes too dangerous, you leave. I don't want you dying for me. Ethan chuckled. Are you giving me orders now? Selene didn't laugh. I'm serious. I've watched people sacrifice themselves for me before. I won't let it happen again. Ethan studied her. He saw pain there, not just from being hunted, but from losing people. He held her gaze. Then slowly he nodded. I don't plan on dying anytime soon, Selene. Selene exhaled, relief flickering in her expression. So, what's our first move? Ethan picked up his knife, the blade catching the faint glow of the room. First, we need to find out exactly what Nova is hiding. Selene nodded. Ethan stood, his resolve clear. They weren't running anymore. They were going to finish this. But deep inside, Ethan knew. There would be a price, and he could only hope. It wouldn't be Selene. The final battle. They weren't running anymore. For 3 days, Ethan and Selene had tracked Nova's movements, mapping out their operations. Now they knew where to strike. Nova's headquarters sat in the heart of Neo Haven, hidden in plain sight under the guise of a private research facility. But Ethan knew the truth. Inside, it wasn't just a lab. It was a prison for beings humanity was never meant to find. And they were going in. From the rooftop of a neighboring building, Selene peered down at the glowing city below. Everything looked peaceful, but she knew the truth. Inside Nova's walls, a nightmare was waiting. Ethan stepped beside her, his expression hard as steel. You sure about this? Selene didn't look at him, but her voice was unwavering. I don't have a choice, Ethan nodded. Then let's go. Guided by Ethan's intel, they maneuvered through the shadows, avoiding the main entry points. There was a way in, an old ventilation shaft leading into the lower levels. Selene placed a hand against the cold metal wall, closing her eyes. She could feel the energy inside, pulsing through the structure. They're here, Ethan gave the signal. Then we move. They slipped through the vents, making their way into the depths of the facility. No alarms, no resistance. Too easy. As they emerged into a dimly lit corridor, Selene froze. Her breath hitched. Something's wrong. Ethan gripped his gun. They knew we were coming? Selene closed her eyes, focusing. Then she whispered, It's a trap. The alarms blared. The steel doors slammed shut behind them. They were locked in. Ethan drew his weapon, scanning the area. How do we get out? Selene's gaze darted around. Before she could answer, beams of red light filled the corridor. A team of Nova operatives stormed in, weapons raised. Then came the voice. Cold, calculated, smug. I warned you, Drake. Nova's commander. Ethan clenched his jaw. You again. Behind a reinforced glass wall, the commander watched like a scientist observing a failed experiment. You actually thought you could take down Nova? Selene stepped forward, her silver eyes burning. I don't need to destroy Nova. I just need to erase what you've done. The commander smirked. Then by all means, try. He raised a hand. Gunfire erupted. Ethan grabbed Selene, pulling her down as plasma shots ripped through the air. Selene had seconds to react. She closed her eyes and tore open space itself. A fracture in reality appeared before them. Ethan, now! Ethan didn't hesitate. He leapt through the rift, just as a deadly shot blasted the space they had just occupied. They reappeared inside Nova's central lab, and what they saw froze them in place. Rows of containment pods lined the room. Inside them, beings not of this world, captured, experimented on. Selene's hands tightened into fists. What have they done to them? Ethan scanned the lab's control panels. We don't have much time. If we can shut down their main system, Nova loses everything. Selene nodded. I can do it. Before they could move, the doors crashed open. The commander stepped inside, this time with no barrier between them. Do you really think you can change anything, Selene? Selene's gaze hardened. I don't have to change Nova. I just have to stop you. The commander's smirk deepened. Then do it. Selene closed her eyes. She placed her hand on the central control unit. Ethan stepped back. He didn't know what she was about to do, but he knew she wouldn't stop. A pulse of energy erupted from her, sending shockwaves through the facility. The containment pods shattered. The beings inside them awoke, their eyes filled with confusion and rage. Nova panicked. Shut it down! The commander shouted. Alarms blared. The entire structure trembled. Selene gritted her teeth. Ethan, go! Ethan spun toward her. What? We leave together. Selene smiled, but it was the saddest smile he had ever seen. I was never meant to stay, Ethan. He reached for her, but she shook her head. If you stay, you'll die. And if I stay, the universe will break. Ethan clenched his fists. I don't care about the universe. Selene gently touched his face, her silver eyes filled with something almost human, almost longing. But I do. The energy around her began to crackle. The space between them warped, rippling like water. Selene whispered. So softly Ethan almost didn't hear it. Find me. Ethan clenched his fists. This wasn't fair. Selene. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing against his. Just for a second, just long enough for him to feel the warmth of her touch. You changed everything, Ethan. Then she was gone. Then she was gone. Selene shook her head. I have to finish this. If I don't, Nova will rebuild. Ethan's stomach dropped. Selene, no. She grabbed his hand, one last time. Her eyes, glowing brighter than ever, held a quiet farewell. Ethan, live. A final surge of energy exploded, and then everything went white. Ethan woke up in the rubble. The lab was destroyed. Nova was gone. The beings once held captive, now free. But Selene, she wasn't there. Ethan rose to his feet, looking around. Then he looked up. The night sky stretched endlessly above him. Somewhere out there, she was waiting, and he was going to find her. The final promise. Ethan stood among the ruins of Nova's headquarters, his breathing heavy. No more alarms. No more agents. No more Selene. Just silence. A few hours ago, this place had been an impenetrable fortress, a research facility that housed prisoners, not experiments. Now it was reduced to ash and rubble. Selene had succeeded. Nova was gone. But the cost, she had vanished. Ethan scanned the wreckage, desperate for any sign that she was still here. But there was nothing, just smoke and ruins. He crouched, picking up a damaged control panel from the wreckage. The cracked screen flickered one last message before dying. Dimensional gateway activated. Destination unknown. Ethan's grip tightened. Selene was gone. But where? The first light of dawn crept over the distant skyline, casting long shadows through the desolate remains of Nova's empire. Neo Haven's streets were still bustling, oblivious to what had happened here tonight. The world kept turning, but Ethan knew everything had changed. The captives of Nova had disappeared. Some might have returned home. Others might still be here. But Ethan didn't care about any of them. He cared about one person. He stepped through the ruins, his boots crushing shattered glass and scorched metal. And then he saw it. Something small, something glowing faintly beneath the rubble. a silver crystal. He knelt, picking it up carefully. It was warm. Even without knowing how, Ethan recognized it immediately. Selene's. He clenched it in his fist. She was still out there. That night, Ethan sat in his dimly lit apartment, his drink untouched on the table. He couldn't sleep. The glow of his computer screen illuminated his face as he combed through the last remaining Nova files. Then, he found it. A signal. A set of unfamiliar symbols buried deep within Nova's system. But when translated, it was just one simple message. Ethan, find me. His heart slammed against his ribs. She was alive. Somewhere. Out there. Beyond this world. Beyond this reality. Selene was waiting for him. Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket, slipping the silver crystal into his pocket. But just as he stepped out the door, his computer screen flickered. A new message appeared. You're not the only one looking for her. He didn't know where he had to go. He didn't know how long it would take. But he knew one thing. No matter how far, no matter what it takes, he was going to find her. Beneath the neon glow of Neo Haven's skyline, a new journey began, and Ethan made his final promise. He would never stop searching.